Nights in Satan's service. Just saying it out loud, and you can almost hear the hushed, horrified whispers of parents all across America. That's what many genuinely believe the iconic band Kiss actually stood for. Picture this, it's 1983, a fiery preacher in Nashville stands before a packed stadium of impressionable teens, his voice booming as he warns them that listening to this band, quote, demons will crawl through your headphones. Fast forward just 1 year, and a city council in a quiet Arkansas town is actively trying to ban Kiss from ever playing there. We're talking album burnings, concert picket lines, and suddenly the biggest, loudest rock show on earth was looking like Public Enemy #1. So how did four guys in platform boots, painted faces, and outrageous costumes manage to scare the living daylights out of America's Bible Belt? And why did the panic spread so far, so fast that even a seemingly innocuous retailer like Sears felt compelled to pull Kiss merchandise off its shelves? Stick around because I'm going to take you guys through Kiss, the Satanic Panic, and the outraged parents that got involved. Alright, so let's set the stage. It's 1975. The Vietnam War had just come to a chaotic end. Watergate is still a fresh, unsettling memory, and millions of suburban kids are seeking something, anything to believe in. For many, that something became a shared religion, the glorious, rebellious sound of FM radio. Then, a seismic event, Kiss, unleashes their live album, Alive. And almost overnight, it feels like every basement in America has a kid fumbling or perhaps mastering the iconic riff to Rock and Roll All Night. Now, parents who were already a little twitchy about their long hair, bell bottoms, and the general air of youthful rebellion started noticing things. They spot Gene Simmons, who they dubbed the Demon, breathing fire with a terrifying intensity on the cover of Rolling Stone. Then they'd catch a glimpse of the blood-spitting routine during the Destroyer tour, a moment designed for shock, and man, it even put porn star spit or swallow scenes to shame.
I think I'm good at it as well.
But fear, widespread moral panic, doesn't just explode overnight, it simmers. While the band was selling out arenas across the globe, the unease was growing within America. It really started to boil over when the 1980 election ushered in a powerful new wave of social conservative politics, a movement keen on reasserting traditional values. Tipper Gore hadn't even formed the Parents Music Resource Center yet, but church newsletters were already circulating, warning that heavy drums literally equaled heavy demons. Now, Kiss was a band that never shied away from a marketing opportunity. They slapped their logo on everything imaginable, from lunchboxes to action figures and even comic books. And that was the tipping point for many. Suddenly, the supposed threat wasn't just lurking in concert halls or on album covers, it was inside the cafeteria, nestled between a peanut butter sandwich and a thermos. And this is what felt really confronting for the conservatives. It was the perfect moral panic cocktail. Kids absolutely loved it, parents fundamentally didn't understand it, and cable TV was ready and willing to broadcast the outrage 24/7. This wasn't just about music anymore, it was about a perceived invasion of the family home, a direct challenge to parental authority, all wrapped up in glitter, leather, and a whole lot of noise. So now that you've got the background of where the outrage started, let's skip a little bit forward to January 1982. Kiss books a show at the Nashville Municipal Auditorium. Now, Nashville, as you might imagine, is a city with robust religious foundations, and when local pastor Bob Smith heard the word Kiss, he apparently skipped the part where it's an acronym for Keep It Simple, Stupid, or as Paul Stanley himself would joke, kids in service of Satan, whatever sells tickets. Smith in turn told his congregation with absolute conviction that the band's name literally pledges allegiance to Lucifer himself. So, can you imagine the outrage amongst the Christian conservatives at this point, 40 plus years ago? I certainly can. That Sunday night, approximately 300 impassioned congregants descended upon the venue, their faces etched with righteous indignation, their hands clutching picket signs. And these weren't just polite suggestions, these were stark, fiery declarations. Signs blared "Kiss equals kids in Satan's service," and the chilling warning, "Turn or burn." The TV news crew is always on the hunt for compelling visuals like this, swooped in like vultures, because let's be honest, nothing photographs quite as dramatically as a wide-eyed 12-year-old fan decked out in makeshift demon makeup, staring in, I guess, bewilderment at a sign that states he's going straight to hell. The footage aired on all three major Nashville networks, and just like that, the narrative was cemented, etched into the public consciousness. Kiss wasn't just a band, it was a recruitment tool for the devil himself. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Similar scenes began popping up in cities with strong Southern Baptist footprints like Little Rock, Arkansas, Corpus Christi, Texas, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Basically anywhere a strong conservative Christian community felt its values were under siege, Kiss became the convenient target. Promoters understandably started getting spooked. Some venues outright cancelled the Kiss shows, fearing the backlash and the negative publicity. Others, desperate to keep the dates, demanded that Kiss drop their signature blood-spitting bit, a cornerstone of Gene Simmons' stage persona. Gene, on the other hand, who was always the showman and staunch defender of the band's theatrics, flatly refused this request. The consequences were immediate. Ticket sales dipped, and reporters, sensing a crack in the rock juggernaut's armor, started asking if rock's most commercial, most outrageous act was finally facing its comeuppance. Was this the end for the Painted Faces quartet? No one knew, but everyone would soon find out. Now let's go even further into the 1980s Kiss lore. First up, the infamous KISS is an acronym for Knights in Satan's Service. This one was a heavyweight champion of rumour. Nobody in the band uttered this phrase, of course, but it got printed on church flyers and newsletters with such conviction that it simply felt true to a lot of concerned parents and impressionable young kids. It tapped directly into the fear of secret societies and hidden agendas, making the band's outlandish imagery seem like a deliberate coded message. Then there was the ultimate classic. If you play Detroit Rock City backward, you'll hear "I command you in the name of Lucifer." This wasn't unique to Kiss. The backward masking panic was a huge deal in the 80s, with everyone from Led Zeppelin to the Eagles being accused of hiding subliminal messaging in their records. For Kiss, with their already demonic image and presence, it was practically a given that their music would harbour such dark secrets and dark messaging. Parents would actually sit by their turntables, carefully reversing records, convinced they were uncovering irrefutable proof of evil. And next, the band's logo itself became a source of intense scrutiny. The two S letters, stylized to look like lightning bolts, were frequently misinterpreted as Nazi SS symbols, or even worse, as three backward S shapes forming the dreaded 666, the mark of the beast. This accusation added a layer of historical and biblical horror to the already potent satanic claims, painting the band not just as evil, but as historically dangerous. And then, of course, there's the pyrotechnics, because fire, oh no, those weren't just flashpots and smoke bombs. According to Panic Whispers, they were literally ritual fire offerings, direct invocations of dark forces designed to empower the band and ensnare the audience. Every fiery burst on stage was, of course, seen as a deliberate act of black magic. But finally, a slightly more whimsical but still unsettling rumour was Ace Frehley, the spaceman, wasn't human at all. He was in fact a ghost who has sold his soul to the devil for his talkbox and guitar prowess. This one, while less overtly satanic, still contributed to the band's aura of being other, beyond the realm of normal human experience, and therefore potentially dangerous. Now, despite all the rumour, none of these claims, not a single one, would hold up even in a 5-second Google search today. But fact-checking is cold comfort when your mum has just found a Kiss record in your bedroom and it's the middle of the 1980s and she's now crying in the kitchen, generally convinced you're on the direct path to evil and perdition. Psychologists, on the other hand, have a term for this phenomenon, the availability cascade. It describes how the more you hear a claim, especially if it's repeated by trusted sources or within your social circle, the truer it feels, regardless of its factual basis. Don't know where we've heard that before. This effect is turbocharged if the claim taps into pre-existing anxieties, such as Satanism, and in Reagan-era America, those anxieties were plentiful. The anxieties of Satan, drugs, and then also the anxiety to parents of kids slipping out of their control and away from traditional values. So Kiss, through their sheer theatrics and accidental timing, managed to check every single one of those boxes, often without even trying, often with just existing. By the spring of 1983, Kiss was pushing their new album, Creatures of the Night. It was arguably their heaviest record to date, a thundering return to their hard rock roots after some experimental detours. Critics, the ones who ultimately like to point out flaws, missteps, and the negativity and disappointments of a new record, at the time loved it. They praised its raw energy and powerful sound, but radio, which is always the gatekeeper, largely ignored it. The lead single, I Love It Loud, which today is a classic, barely made much movements, peaking at a dismal 102 on the Billboard Hot 100 list. The musical comeback was struggling to find an audience, not because of its quality, but because of the poisoned atmosphere surrounding the band and those ongoing rumours. Meanwhile, the moral panic machine was still in high gear. Preachers weren't just sermonizing anymore, they were mailing out flyers. Remember those? The ones that I mentioned earlier with little anecdotes about Kiss that weren't true, to congregations and community centres, warning in dire tones that attending a Kiss concert was nothing short of signing your soul to the devil. Those flyers often depicted grotesque caricatures of the band members, accompanied by biblical verses about damnation and going to hell. Arena owners, particularly in the South, started listening and inserting morality clauses into their contracts. These clauses stipulated that if the band used satanic props, a term left conveniently vague, the promoter could void the contract without penalty. The financial risk suddenly became astronomical for concert organisers and the band itself. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley found themselves at a crossroads. They had a choice: water down the show, strip away the theatrics that made Kiss Kiss, or double down on their true artistic vision. True to the rebellious spirit, they doubled down, blood, fire and all. They wouldn't compromise the art, but the market, influenced by fear, was unforgiving. Ticket sales for the Creatures of the Night tour remained stubbornly soft. Then came the absolute hammer blow. In May, half the planned Southwest leg of the tour was cancelled outright. The official statement from the band blamed logistical issues, a euphemism for a far deeper problem. Insiders, however, openly admitted the truth. Churches and religious organisations were successfully leaning on city councils and venue operators to deny permits, revoke contracts, and generally make it impossible for the band to perform. Creatures of the Night, despite its critical acclaim, became Kiss's poorest selling record at that point in their career. The tour, a shadow of their previous stadium-filling extravaganzas, ended early. For the first time since 1974, which was their breakout year, Kiss was off the road before summer even began. The Satanic Panic had scored its biggest, most painful win, and the lesson seemed clear. Fear, when wielded effectively, just works. It could stop a rock and roll machine dead in its tracks. It could stop other things, but I don't know what I mean by that. Do you? Skipping right into October 1984, the moral majority, a powerful conservative political force, was flexing its considerable muscle. And MTV, then a burgeoning cultural behemoth, was still finding its voice. In a brilliant or perhaps cynical move for ratings, MTV aired a special called Rock, A Threat to Our Children. The host was none other than the sensational Geraldo Rivera, and he orchestrated a debate that would become legendary. Gene Simmons, aka the demon himself, squaring off against the fire and brimstone televangelist Pastor Jimmy Swaggart. Clips of this showdown, long before the internet made such things instantly shareable, circulated like wildfire. You had Gene lounging in leather, his infamous tongue occasionally making an appearance, exuding this cool, almost bored defiance. Across from him, Swaggart, red-faced and indignant, waved a Kiss album in the air, practically trembling as he declared it reeks of the pit, a direct conduit to hell itself. The studio audience was a mix of fans and concerned citizens. Every time Gene, who appeared to be quite articulate and well-read, quoted scripture back at the preacher, which was a testament to his college education in education, cheers erupted. It was a spectacle, pure and unadulterated. The ratings, as expected, exploded, and the letters that flooded MTV afterward, they told a fascinating story. A surprising 60% sided with Kiss, seeing them as misunderstood artists, while 40% still wanted them presumably exorcised. Interesting perception for Christian values. The televised confrontation didn't magically end the panic, but it absolutely flipped the script. In the court of public opinion, Kiss suddenly looked like the reasonable party, the calm, collected artists defending their craft and their stage show. Swaggart, on the other hand, looked quite angry, even irrational, as a man yelling at fireworks. His passion was bordering on fanaticism, and the irony of it all would become even more delicious less than 4 years later, when Swaggart, the vocal moral crusader who he liked to position himself as, was forced to resign from the ministry over a very public prostitution scandal.
I have sinned against you, my Lord. And I would ask that your precious blood would wash and cleanse every stain until it is in the seas of God's forgetfulness.
Gene Simmons, on the other hand, kept touring, blood spitting intact. His career was enduring, as was the career of Kiss. So the irony is, Kiss 1, Moral Panic 0. It was a stark reminder that those who preach the loudest about morality sometimes have the most to hide, and 99% of the time have a skeleton in their closet. So let's be clear about this. Kiss never claimed to be saints. Their image was built on rock and roll excess and theatrics, not piety. But one thing they understood perhaps better than any band of their era was brand management and how to market themselves. By 1984, they made a strategic pivot. With the release of Animalize, they dialed back the overt occult imagery that had fueled so much of the panic, and in its place, they cranked up the pop hooks, crafting a more accessible, radio-friendly sound. The result was Heaven's on Fire became their biggest hit in years, a clear signal that the public was ready for a slightly less menacing, but still undeniably powerful rock act Kiss. They also began to start courting the mainstream press, a tactic to humanise the band and counter the satanic narrative. Paul Stanley, the star child, told People magazine that the demon makeup was just comic book fun, a harmless extension of childhood fantasy, not a pact with the devil. Peter Criss, the Catman, even appeared on a kids' show, his face in a friendly kitten-like paint, devoid of any dark theatrics. They were deliberately trying to show a different, softer side, proving they weren't the monsters depicted in church bulletins. More importantly, though, they made a bold move by embracing the very technology that many parents and moral watchdogs distrusted. At the time, that was MTV. They started shooting slick, high-production videos that screamed commerce and catchy tunes, not covens and dark rituals. These videos showcased their musicianship and showmanship in a controlled, palatable way, bypassing the moral gatekeepers of old, of local radio, of community groups, and slowly but surely arenas began to fill again. The panic, starved of its central target, began to lose oxygen, parents perhaps realising the absurdity of it all and their complaints started to understand that Kiss merch was probably funding college savings for the band members' own kids, not the Antichrist. By 1985, the cultural winds had shifted significantly, thanks to Tipper Gore's PMRC having made some noise about Kiss and having already set its sights on new targets, most notably the sexually provocative lyrics of Prince's Darling Nikki. Kiss was in a strange twist of fate, old news by those standards and by this time. They had weathered the storm, they had adapted, and they had ultimately survived. But the scars still lingered there. The band never again hit the height of mid-70s sales peaks of their heyday, and they certainly remembered exactly who had tried to run them out of town, who had called them agents of evil. It was a tough lesson in the fickle nature of public perception and the enduring power of fear. Let's quantify the wreckage. Because while Kiss survived, the Immoral Panic left an undeniable mark. Between 1982 and 1984, the height of the frenzy, Kiss played a staggering 28 fewer US shows than their original routing, a significant financial blow to a band built on consistent and constant touring. Merchandise revenue, a huge part of their empire, plummeted by a massive 35%. And then there's the album sales. Creatures of the Night, despite its critical acclaim, sold a respectable 400,000 copies. Respectable for most bands, sure, but for Kiss it was a stark underperformance. Their prior record, Music from the Older, a conceptual album about a boy king that even many fans found baffling, had still managed to go gold, selling over 500,000 copies. The panic had clearly impacted their commercial reach. Radio consultants, terrified of FCC complaints and boycotts from concerned parent groups, began implementing unofficial but widely followed no kiss after midnight clauses, effectively limiting their airplay to late night slots when fewer impressionable ears were listening. And this stifled their ability to reach new audiences and maintain their mainstream relevance and appeal. Imagine that kind of internal debate. That the very cornerstone of their identity, the visual representation of their mythology of who they were, was on a chopping block, not because of artistic evolution, but because of external pressure. In other words, these protesters didn't just slow ticket sales, they accelerated the end of an era, forcing Kiss to confront their identity in a way they hadn't anticipated. When the faces finally did come off, on MTV in 1983, it was a moment of profound change. Some fans cheered, seeing it as a bold evolution, a shedding of old skin, while others mourned, feeling it was the death of the spectacle, the end of the magic. Either way, the Satanic Panic undeniably pushed Kiss to reinvent themselves faster than they probably would have needed to, and perhaps more drastically than they or their most devoted fans truly ever wanted. It was a forced metamorphosis, a direct consequence of the cultural battle waged against them. So strip away the pyro, the makeup, and the loud guitars, and you're left with a deeper, more profound American anxiety. Who truly controls teen identity? In 1980, a significant 50% of US teens identified as religious. By 1990, that had slipped to 42%. And this wasn't just a statistical blip on the radar, it was a perceived crisis for many religious communities. Youth pastors and church leaders saw KISS not as the cause of this drift, but as a potential symptom. A flashy, loud symbol of kids drifting away from tradition, away from the church, and toward arena-sized rebellion. Add to this volatile mix the pervasive Cold War uncertainty, the rising divorce rates that were reshaping family units and family structures, and the unprecedented, ubiquitous influence of cable TV. And together, you've got a perfect storm of societal anxiety. People felt like the moral fabric of America was unraveling, and they needed something tangible to fight against and to blame. Sociologists call this symbolic crusading, attacking highly visible symbols of change and perceived decay in an effort to reassert moral order and traditional values. KISS, with their outrageous costumes, suggestive lyrics, and general air of defiance, just happened to be the most flamboyant, most undeniable symbol walking, or rather strutting, around on the stage. But what's truly ironic, and a point that's often missed, is that the very protest meant to condemn and silence the band ended up handing KISS an invaluable gift of free advertising. Every picket sign, every angry sermon, every news report about the satanic rock band translated directly into free primetime exposure for KISS. It fueled their mystique, making them even more alluring to the rebellious youth they supposedly corrupted. As Paul Stanley had said, we should have sent the preachers a fruit basket and a royalty check. KISS were unwittingly the best publicists that they ever had. Now, finally, let's fast forward to the 90s, to 1996 to be exact. The world had changed dramatically, and then KISS reforms with its original classic lineup and, crucially, the full iconic makeup. The Alive Worldwide tour kicks off, and it's a colossal success, selling over 1.1 million tickets in North America alone. Same blood, same fire, same knights in Satan's service, urban legends still floating around. Yet, no mass protests, no angry mobs, no album burnings. What in the world had changed? Culture, pretty much. Culture had changed. By the mid-90s, the evangelical energy that fueled the initial panic had largely shifted its focus. The culture wars were still raging, but the battlegrounds had moved to abortion clinics and gay rights, issues that felt more immediate and politically charged than a rock band from the 1970s. Heavy metal, once Public Enemy #1, was no longer a fresh threat. It had ironically become nostalgic comfort food for a generation that had grown up with it. Perhaps the most poignant shift was generational turnover. The kids who once secretly loved KISS, who blasted rock and roll all night in their bedrooms, had grown up. They had become parents themselves. And what did they remember? Not the fear, not the sermons, but the music, the excitement, and the rebellion behind it. Now, these same parents were queuing up with their own children, all wearing vintage KISS shirts, bought at Target probably, ready to share a piece of their own story, their own rebellion. Interestingly, even some progressive pastors, recognizing the cultural shift, started quoting Rock and Roll All Night in youth sermons, not as a warning, but as an example of finding joy and community. The panic didn't end with a grand theological truce or a formal apology. It ended quietly, with generations passing the torch, recognizing that the threat was in fact just good old-fashioned rock and roll. Moral panics, as the KISS saga so clearly illustrates, never truly vanish. They simply migrate. In the 90s, it was violent video games like Mortal Kombat that was corrupting youth. The 2000s saw Harry Potter spells accused of teaching witchcraft. Today, it's whatever algorithm-fueled conspiracy theory or cultural trend is currently scaring your uncle on Facebook, or perhaps a new music genre deemed too explicit or nihilistic. The KISS story is a potent and powerful reminder that fear sells faster and often more effectively than truth. And nothing, absolutely nothing, turbocharges teenage fandom quite like parents banning something. Think about it. Want to guarantee your kid worship a band with an almost religious fervour? Just tell them it's satanic and not to listen to it and ban them from listening to it. That'll have that effect. Want to unintentionally cripple working artists and stifle creative expression? Organise a record burning without bothering to fact-check the lyrics or understand the artistic intent. The real casualty in these moral crusades isn't the band or the art itself, it's the vital conversation between generations. When parents driven by fear scream devil and kids feeling misunderstood hear, both sides immediately stop listening to one another. The lines of communication snap, and the Kiss controversy, for all its absurdity, could have been an incredible opportunity. It could have been a chance to discuss consumerism, the evolving nature of sexuality in popular culture, the power of imagery, or even, yes, pyrotechnic safety, but instead it devolved into this shouting match about imaginary demons, a battle fought with fear and misinformation. So, the next time culture throws up a new boogeyman, maybe we should pause and take a step back instead of condemning immediately. Why not ask the kids why they like it? You might discover that the only thing hiding under the bed isn't some sinister force, but a dusty Kiss lunchbox. Collectible, innocent, silly, safe, and overpriced for sale on eBay. So ultimately, why were Christians so generally scared of Kiss back in the day? Well, because the band, whether intentionally or not, packaged every single parental anxiety of the era into one glittering, ear-splitting spectacle, which was overt sexuality, overwhelming volume, gender-bending makeup, and the terrifying allure of youth autonomy. Because for many preachers, a clear, flamboyant villain was exactly what they needed to rally the flock, to galvanise their congregations against perceived moral decay. And because Kiss, with their kabuki paint and fire-breathing antics, looked like Central Casting's perfect idea of demon recruitment fair, because America in the early 80s felt like everything was teetering on the brink of destruction, from the economy to the Cold War to the traditional family structure, fear, raw and visceral fear, is always easier to aim than nuance, because it's just simpler to embrace than to understand.